Chapter 26. Amharam Awoken. The dreary air accompanied by the murky swamps had made our trek northwest of the Kaf more troublesome than we had anticipated. Our intermission at the penitentiary, albeit brief as it was, has also set us back. And what's more, to conserve energy ought we find need for it in battle, we have been pacing ourselves. Oddly enough, our discovery of and arrival at this abandoned, shabby, and presumably long-forgotten stone structure has brought a great sense of relief to us. Leastwise, with a roof over our heads, we may more assuredly rest for the night. Granted that night and day are, in these strange times, hardly discernible from one another. Sa still manages to sneak us a small gift whensoever the opportunity presents itself. This will surely be indefinite, and thus we shall gratefully take what we are given. Saba clears the debris blocking the main door of the ruin. It creaks loudly as I pull it open, then it falls over in its entirety. One of the stones that Saba had pushed aside had been acting as the final leg for this millennia-old entryway. It is a wonder that the ill-maintained structure had not toppled in its sum. We step over the rubble and into the dust-ridden vestige.
It reeks of many deaths in here.
His nose is more tolerant than mine. I can barely breathe through the stench of the spoiled gases. It is as though the undead tree of Hakor were stuffed into a small chamber and sealed, preserving the foul smell of it until whosoever happened upon its holding cell had relieved the miasma of its motionless sterility. It pummels our senses, provoking our tears from its wretchedness. A quick survey of our surroundings yields a mixed conclusion. Behind and beneath the mounds of dust and webbing are scrupulously crafted designs, fractured mosaics, ancient depictions, and finely engraved scriptures. These walls are plastered in a tongue that predates our own. The writings are even hoarier than those of the stone tablet from the age of Parias. This is before us, I say. Saba appears to be in disbelief, scowling at my comment as though it were absurd to say such things. I am serious. Oma is age-old, but our written histories go no further back than a few thousand years, and even those are fragmented and difficult to decipher. This structure, whatsoever it may have been designed for, has been here for much longer than any of the archaeological findings of the Omani. A damning chill rattles me to the bone.
Had you chosen any other crypt to defile, you would have considered yourselves lucky.
From the shadows of the ceiling, a crawling voice descends down each wall in the chamber and converges upon us. His dialect is as ancient as his is malicious. Where have we come to, and what manner of creature have we awoken?
Reveal yourself!
Saba's demand echoes and is carried away many arma, despite the breadth of the room we are in being no grander than the span of a mere and modest home from the village which I hail. It is as though an entire world were squeezed into the confines of this inexplicable construct. The hidden enemy moans as though he were having a condemned orgasm, restrained in its peak, yet forced through the clenching of his teeth. Atrocious and vile.
It is said, and it is law that the strong prey on the weak. I am far stronger than strong. And thus, to quell my insatiable appetite, my beloved intruders, I prey on the strong as well, and especially.
His repulsive crowing reverberates, tainting every breath and huff of the damp air and leaving none of it viable for our own use. There is no localizing his whereabouts. It sounds as though he were everywhere and nowhere all at once.
Prey on this, you cowardly bastard!
Saba begins to tremble the already unstable structure, but it comes to a grinding halt as the crypt begins to separate itself into segregating blocks and a variety of other fixed shapes. Each piece of the structure is now reorganizing itself in a manner that allows for it to withstand the quakes that Saba imposes against it. The walls, floors, and ceiling shuffle and adjust with each wave of his assault.
What sort of guest attempts to take control of its host's domain?
The wicked vocals return.
I believe such an individual is termed a trespasser, a thief. But here, I call them my prey, my victim, my snare-resisting, net-thrashing, hopelessly cornered food.
He frames himself and his abode as though an arachnid and its web. Wheresoever the mesh is pulled, he thickens its support, making it sturdy against gale and quakes alike. The sporadic pauses between his words are awkward to say the least, and all too spacious, leaving us unsure when and where to respond to the concealed fiend, if we are to do so at all. Out of the nothingness of an abyss, my sight is deprived of any sensation in regards to color, as our inhospitable entertainer brings his fitful threat to an unceremonious end. All of the lanterns in the room ignite with eerie gray flames. A thick water, or some manner of gelatinous liquid, drips from each crack and corner of the ceiling. Before this newfangled plight can be fully digested, the assumed water bursts through in its entirety and floods the enclosure, drenching Saba and I from head to sole and swallowing us in its deluge. The lanterns are put out just as swiftly as they were ignited, and though submerged from the muffled underwater snap of their master, they relight once again. The hues and shades of my vision have returned, and are instantly introduced to the foul tinge of what I assumed was water, but is in actuality blood. Returning to us our much-needed breaths, it pools to the center of the room with the ripples accumulating in reverse. The bubbling lake of blood that filled the room turns to a mere puddle. From its center, a single, long, and clawed finger emerges. Following it, a decrepit hand grips the surface of the pool as though it were a solid ledge. The other hand and arm slowly reach out and do the same. What transpires next further defies my conception of reality.
I am he who has arrived, but was never delivered,
he announces. What could this mean? That he is what ought have never been? Or does he imply that he is one who has dictated his own path in spite of a scorned fate? The voice originated from directly beside us, stirring us to dash away from one another, pulling our focus from the monster's entry. Yet nothing is there. We turn to face the unhallowed gate once more, but the pool of blood is gone, and in its stead floats a particular creature of the night that I never in my days dreamed I would encounter, for they are the rarest of their strain. The tall nocturnal beast is garbed in a dusty leather regalia, long flowing with a torn cape and a blood-rusted iron mask concealing of his eyes and nose, but showcasing in their horrid totality the putrid rot of his lips and discolored fangs. "You're a necroschiff that can speak!" How is it that this creature, of a type that is otherwise unintelligent, this vampiric miscreant, how is it that it can formulate words? And why is it dressed as though aware of its nakedness? He growls ferociously. I have offended him. It is evident from his size alone that he is no ordinary necroschiff. There is nothing typical about necroschiffs, so to speak, but this one has an intellect and host of abilities eclipsing any I've read of.
Of course I can. However, I am the only one left among the few of our kind who could ever do so. You see, this is a skill. One that I was forced to reclaim from your wretched species throughout the millennia.
He lets out an eerie croak, and it visibly rattles against his throat in a nauseating dribble. I motion for Saba to compose himself. He is tense and eager to attack. I wish to learn exactly what it is that this necroschiff insinuates by his use of the word reclaim.
Oh, interested in our history now, is that it? Yes, reclaim. I've taken back the acumen of our species from your own. Love by way of murder, division, and expulsion made us a forgetful kind. A kind forced into a devolution and degeneration and sent back to our primitive shapes.
He tells me without my asking. Did he read my mind?
Why, yes. It is simply another characteristic that I procured from a rather interesting specimen. However, I cannot transmit my thoughts to you. Thus, we shall speak. Or rather, I shall speak, and you shall hearken.
He twitches and convulses in the way that a dying body or a fresh corpse would with the riveting run of rigor mortis sprinting to flee it. This thing is not undead in the way Hakor was. He resembles more the mythical demons than any zombie, which brings to question whether or not they were myths to begin with. Saba senses he is somehow being left out of the fragmented dialogue at hand. Let's hear him out. I turn and ensure him. Agitated, he sighs in a low growl and agrees by his inaction alone. Our dubious host, now confident that he has our unequivocal attention, sits upon the very air itself as though it were a throne fit for a ruler.
Now then, little, young, powerless flowers, for lack of a more fitting title, how shall I begin?
Saba snarls. He will not tolerate any demeaning of his warriorhood.
Silence!
The dark figure's rage blusters for our respect, the arteries of his neck bulging against it by his outrage. The lit torches flicker wildly at the furor of his exasperation, and the chamber becomes clogged with the necroshift's sullied authority.
Before Omar came to be known by this name, my kind basked in its virginity. They were few in the beginning, foreign by nature, yet we were delighted to be any place save whence we came. Anywhere was safer than where we had hailed anywhere. In our search for refuge, our explorations ran wild. And though our new home world presented unknown threats, throughout the ages we conquered them all. For we originate from a race that has experienced many dawns and many settings of many worlds. Each prey we consumed became a part of us. The desirable traits were kept whilst the less useful were discarded. In mere decades, we became the apex species of this world. Then, the Omani challenged us. Or ought I articulate more particularly? The Anu, your primary ancestors. They were unlike the rest of the species here, gifted with an immaculate capability, the one to harness and dictate At the time, I was just as fascinated as I was afraid. Here we were, blessed to escape the woes of our old home and those who hunted us, only to be greeted by a force that despised and rejected us all the same. With their numbers being greater than ours, and by their employment of underhanded tactics, they prevailed.
He spits and moans in disgust. I do not understand. I know not by which name this being goes by.
Amharam.
Right. He can read our minds. Amharam. Is it not fair to say that you came into conflict with the Omani before they were civilized? Thus, is there no chance for a diplomatic mending now that we are? I propose a treaty that I have no right to enact on the behalf of the whole.
You're mistaken if you believe us to be so naive. We are creatures of the night, here and there, then and now.
So what happened between your kind and the Anu?
They massacred us in our weakness during the daylight hours, once it came to be that, through a deliberate and unprovoked hunt, they located our central dens. Those who survived were the handful of us whom were scattered across the outskirts beyond our burrows at the time of the genocide. Nevertheless, those of my enduring brethren were eventually murdered as well. I alone am left.
I am deeply sorry for your great loss. A sense of guilt overcomes me as though I had participated in these archaic murders. However, swiftly my discernment says to me that I ought not feel such a way, for I have once made the mistake of abandoning the unspoken allegiance of my blood ilk, and I shall not betray them for a kind so radically foreign to our world.
En, do not forget that this is a monster you are speaking to.
Saba interrupts, reinforcing the hindmost of my thought.
Yes, please do remember this indeed.
Amharam snorts.
I am not of this realm, nor is this my first survey of one exotic to me. Thousands of years of feasting upon hundreds of species across dozens of worlds has made me unlike even the rest of my kin.
He sits forward in his invisible sovereignty, leans in and continues.
10 years after that night, luring them into my domain, I killed every Omu Anu from the tribes that partook to those that had nothing to do with our massacre, save a single soul. I dined on the most delicate flesh that I had ever sunk my ill-gotten fangs into those numerous and fearful nights. Each of their skills surged through every crevice and bend of my body. Fresh, unfiltered, raw power. Originally, I had revenge as the motivating factor of my actions, but after my first taste of everything changed. I left a single individual alive knowing that your species is or can be asexual. Yes, he would be the mother seed to my very own garden. A garden illustrious and spanning the world over, ripe for the picking after several millennia. And all I had to do was take a little nap.
He cracks another smile, it widening as his agape maw breaks and snaps the strings and chains of his putrid saliva. His fangs armed and accompanied by a repetitive tick and some discomforting spasms. This thing truly is a monster. He nearly wiped us all out as though we were a smear or a stain to reality, then waited patiently for thousands of years to harvest us once more. I can carry no sympathy for a creature of the night. They are by their very nature wicked parasites. You mean to say you've been farming us, the Omani? I stiffen my grounding. I cannot allow Amharam to run rampant. Did he know Tiamatu would come again? Sa's dismissal breeds the ideal circumstance for such an evil animation to take hold.
Ah, that name. I was unfortunate to have been in slumber during his last visit.
He clicks his vile claws against one another. Is there no barrier I can erect to bar him from my thoughts? So, you did expect Sa to be banished, I say to him.
No. This is a pleasant finding. A welcome surprise. His timing has been coincidental and perfect. I wonder what the flesh of a god tastes like.
He chuckles maniacally, salivating uncontrollably. Everything about Amharam is disturbing to the spirit, from his repugnant appearance to his wretched expressions and blood-curdling speech. Could he legitimately muster the means to consume Tiamatu? Has he no fear whatsoever? Before I can fully contemplate the audacity of such a creature, Amharam stands from his vanquished comfort. Saba tenses up once more.
Calm yourselves, children. After evaluating your scent and studying your minds, I can assure to you that you two are not yet fully ripe for harvest. No, you will grow stronger indeed.
And what's that supposed to mean exactly? You have no intention of preying on us now as we are? I put this threatening question to the monster.
You both stink of a blossoming potential. It'd be a shame if I were to rip you to shreds before you fully matured. I am patient. After all, I did wait this long. Besides, there are plenty of Omani and the Nutu'ai Tomas out there, many of which are more qualified and plump. Some even overdo.
Who says that you've got a say here? Saba furiously exclaims. Whether he does so for his race, I am skeptical. It is more than likely that he intends to avenge himself for the contempt Amharam has displayed against him. We cannot let you do as you please. It is not you who gets to decide what happens next. I align myself in parallel support of Saba. Amharam lets loose a mischievous cackle. The structure begins to reorganize itself once again, and before we can react, we are shifted to the outside by turning walls, sliding floors, and folding ceilings. Once the building has finished regurgitating us, it retreats beneath the surface, burrowing at an incredible pace and covering its exit as it does thus. A living framework. I cannot be surprised by anything now. Yet this is nothing I would promise myself. I've seen much in this outlandish and extended hiatus from my homeland. All of it fresh, all of it new, little of it appetizing.